Hi, I'm Paul Arthur. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. Prime Minister Mark Carney makes a phone call to U.S. President Donald Trump to set up a meeting within the next week. Green Party co-leader Jonathan Pedneault resigns after a disappointing Green Party finish with only one seat and a fifth-place showing in his electoral riding. The Alberta government pledges to put more money into programs that will help build Alberta's workforce, expanding employment support to help employers hire and train workers.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News.
Thanks for joining us. President Donald Trump says he'll be meeting with Mark Carney at the White House within the next week after receiving a call from the Prime Minister. After months of taunting, saying Canada could be the 51st state, Trump says he expects to have a, quote, great relationship with Canada.
Called me up yesterday. He said, "Let's make a deal." You know, he was running for office. They both hated Trump, and it was the one that hated Trump, I think, the least that won. I actually think the conservative hated me much more than the so-called liberal. He's a pretty liberal guy. But no, I spoke to him yesterday. Couldn't have been nicer, and I congratulated him. You know, it was a very mixed signal because it's almost even, which makes it very complicated for the country. It's a pretty tight race, but he's a very nice gentleman, and he's going to come to the White House very shortly, within the next week or less.
Carney has vowed to stand firm against Trump, who has levied tariffs against Canada and made threats targeting our sovereignty. During the election campaign, Carney repeatedly warned that the United States wants our land and resources, saying these are not idle threats. Jonathan Pedneault is resigning as Green Party co-leader, effective immediately. His announcement comes after the party secured only one seat in the federal election, with his fellow co-leader Elizabeth May winning her riding in BC. Pedneault ran in a Liberal stronghold in Montreal and finished in fifth place. The Greens fell to only 1.3% national support and chose not to run candidates in more than 100 ridings in order to prevent Conservative wins. An organization representing Quebec Inuit says some people in Nunavik were effectively denied their right to vote in this week's federal election. Makivik says polling hours were inconsistent across the northern part of the province, and some communities were unable to vote altogether. It wants Elections Canada to investigate and ensure that every Inuk in Nunavik is able to vote in future elections. Alberta is looking at a number of changes to its election rules. Bill 54, if passed, will ban electronic tabulators, require unofficial vote counts to be completed within 12 hours of polls closing, and eliminate the practice of vouching for somebody at a polling station. Justice Minister Mickey Amery says the changes are to strengthen public trust in the integrity of Alberta's elections. But the bill also changes the rules around referendums, raising speculation around Alberta holding a referendum on separation. Instead of citizens having to collect 600,000 signatures in 90 days, they would need to collect about 300,000 signatures in 120 days. The Alberta government will be pumping more money into programs that will help build Alberta's workforce. The government is investing $185 million to expand employment support for Albertans and help employers find, hire, and train workers. Seniors, Community and Social Services Minister Jason Nixon says some of the funds will go to the on-the-job training in collaboration with employers, including more than $20 million in simulated work sites.
Albertans can get paid, get hands-on experience and training from local employers from various industries. This setup helps learners practice tasks safely and prepares them for stable employment. These work sites are one example of how we can provide more than just direct supports. We also help Albertans by removing financial barriers, offering mental health supports, and providing essential work gear. Albertans are known to be hardworking, and I would say that is especially true for those who face barriers to employment. Many of these people have proven what it means to push through even when things are hard, to keep learning and to keep seeking great opportunities. These are qualities that every workplace needs, and I can't wait to see These budget dollars in action helping more Albertans find and maintain meaningful employment and building the workforce that we need to support and grow Alberta's economy.
Currently, there are 5 simulated work sites across the province in Calgary, Red Deer, Grand Prairie, Millet, and Fort Saskatchewan. Nixon says this funding will create even more locations. The Canadian Union of Postal Workers says it has returned to the bargaining table with Canada Post amid uncertainty about a potential labor disruption later this spring. CUP W says it's working to secure new collective agreements for its bargaining units. 55,000 postal workers went on strike back on November 15, 2024. The federal government ordered them back to work on December 17th. The two sides have until May 22nd to reach a new agreement. If they are unable to, workers could be back on strike soon after. The mayor of Vancouver says residents are sick and tired of inquiries and into the recurring pattern of people in a mental health crisis that become a public safety crisis. Ken Sims says the man accused of killing 11 people by driving a vehicle through a street lined with festival goers was under the care of a mental health team and on extended leave from involuntary treatment. Sims says this points to the deeper failure in the mental health care system in British Columbia. Premier David Eby has said he will call a public inquiry if the criminal trial doesn't have answers into the attack. Noel Johansson's wife, Jennifer Darbolet, was one of the 11 people killed in the car attack in Vancouver last Saturday. He says he's still coming to grips with the loss.
She was extraordinary, and I think maybe what made her extraordinary was that she affected more people than she had any idea that she could. She created not just art and paintings, but she created community. It happened quicker than I've ever felt anything happen, and with more force. I felt like I was completely out of control, and in that millisecond, the only thing I could do was put my head forward, because I knew I was falling backwards and I knew my head would smash in the pavement. And I think somehow that saved my life. I have an incredible sadness when I'm alone. I can tell you that, and probably will for the rest of my life. There'll be a hole there for sure. I just want people to know and see the examples that have been set by people like Jen. And, just see connection in the world around you. Don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to be yourself. Be big, be bold.
Meanwhile, mental health experts say communal grief following the Vancouver tragedy will likely persist for months. University of British Columbia sociology professor Seth Aberton says events like Saturday's attack can trigger collective trauma, the sudden destruction of social infrastructure. Aberton says research shows the impacts can spread beyond the injured or witnesses to the larger cultural community. Saskatchewan's police watchdog is investigating a man's death after he was arrested on a First Nation. The Serious Incident Response Team says it happened this week on the James Smith Cree Nation after Mounties were called about a man using bear spray in a home. The agency says officers arrested the man under the Mental Health Services Act, and he died after being handcuffed. It says officers did not use a stun gun and had attempted life-saving measures on the man before he died. Catholic cardinals have set May 7th as the start date for the conclave to elect the successor to Pope Francis, delaying the secret voting for 2 days so they can get to know one another better and find consensus on a candidate before they are sequestered in the Sistine Chapel. Tricia Thomas from the Associated Press has the story.
We are just under a week from the next conclave to elect the next Pope. Cardinals have been gathering from all over the world. Already 2 have dropped out, so now we know we should have 133 cardinal electors. That's 133 so-called princes of the church, who are cardinals under 80, who will go into the Sistine Chapel and choose who will be the next pontiff. Now, they've been meeting every day in what they call cardinal congregations, and they're already coming up with a few problems because 133 is more than they've ever had before, and they come from 71 different countries and they don't know each other, so they've had to wear name tags so that they can learn each other's name for starters. On top of that, they speak a lot of different languages. Italian is the official language at the Vatican, and they've been using interpreters to help out during these congregations, but Vatican officials said today there will be no interpreters allowed inside the Sistine Chapel. Now, once the cardinals do go inside the Sistine Chapel, they're all going to have enough places to sit. So they're putting in new rows of tables for the cardinals to sit at. The Vatican officials said as early as this weekend, they will be attaching the chimney to the roof of the Sistine Chapel that's behind me. And from there, we will see the smoke that comes out after each session of balloting. There's a morning session and an afternoon session. Now, if the smoke is white, that means they've elected the next pope. If the smoke is black, they have to go back to another round of balloting, and there is still no pope.
After a brush with death, actor Dave Thomas from the old comedy show SCTV says he is going to war-torn Ukraine. Back in 2020, Thomas had sepsis in his arms and legs and was in hospice. But after being treated with antibiotics, he pulled through. Now, Thomas says he's heading overseas to make a video for the Kyiv-based Ukrainian Freedom Fund, co-founded by his friend, a retired colonel for the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve.
Okay, I didn't kick the bucket back in 2020. What else am I going to do? What am I going to do that I think is important? And so that's where I am. That's why I'm doing this. I'm not a humanitarian. I don't have any of these skill sets, but I'm going to try. You know, it's the sort of thing where I had a buddy that called me and asked me for help, and he started this Ukrainian Freedom Fund, and I looked at this situation in the Ukraine and I thought, well, this is terrible, and I should try to help. Now got Canadian consultants, a Canadian general on their board, and they put together evac teams to get, you know, old people and children out of frontline areas where they're in danger. They have experts that help defuse unexploded ordnance in the rubble of buildings. They're training locals with, you know, how to deal with field injuries with field medical kits. They're supplying food and clothing and shelter. So there's a lot of stuff that they're doing. But for me, I'm supposed to go to this place called Dnipro. It's D-N-I-P-R-O. It's right on the front line, and I'm going to go to a comedy club there because I want to find out if the Ukrainians can still laugh. And I found just the sort of feedback I got just from over here is, yes, we do laugh. In fact, we laugh more than ever, and that's really important to us. It's a release. And so I want to find out why they're laughing, what they're laughing at. And as somebody who's a comedian, I mean, I'm tremendously disadvantaged because I don't speak the language, but I'm going to get in there and try to figure that out.
Thomas says he hopes to drive donations and do something meaningful with the rest of his life. In local news, it was an exciting day on the west side of Lethbridge today as a special groundbreaking and blessing ceremony took place for a long-awaited new elementary school. Local dignitaries, along with Holy Spirit Catholic School Division board members, put some shovels in the ground to officially kick off construction. Board Chair Carmen Momberket explains the impact this school will have on the community.
That $18 million will provide a home for children to learn for probably the next 80 years. So pretty small investment for such a major impact that it will have in the lives of children in this part of the city. The biggest alleviation of pressure is with Father Leonard Van Tighem School. That school has been past full for too many years. St. Patrick's Elementary School in Riverstone, same thing. We have a little bit of room in St. Martha's School, but that school is filling up rapidly as people from the world come to this part of the city. The population of the city continues to grow so fast. We're going to have to move with another construction quickly. The city demands it.
The new school is going to be built with the possibility for expansion and addition of portables. So at time of opening, it's approximately 400 students at time of opening, with the ability to expand as the population grows, which we fully anticipate will be happening very soon.
The school is expected to be open for the next school year. Holy Spirit Catholic School Division is comprised of 16 schools and one outreach center within 6 communities: Lethbridge, Coaldale, Picture Butte, Pincher Creek, Bow Island, and Tabor. And another local construction project also began this week on a new temple for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Lethbridge. The new House of the Lord Temple will be the 10th of its kind in Canada and the 4th located in Alberta. Other provincial temples are located in Calgary, Edmonton, and Cardston. The 9-acre site just off of Whoop Up Drive and Mauritania Road West was dedicated with a groundbreaking ceremony on Saturday and was attended by representatives of interfaith, business, government, and Indigenous backgrounds. The more than 44,000 square foot temple was announced in April of 2023 by LDS President Russell Nelson during a conference in Salt Lake City. The mild weather pattern continues, and we could see summer-like hot temperatures for the weekend. Weather details are on the way after the break.
Our 7-day forecast has us with a high of 15 for today, with a chance of showers. Tomorrow has us with a high of 18 with sunny skies. Friday has a high of 26, also with sunny skies. And Saturday, a high of 28 with sunny skies. Sunday is going to have a high of 15 with partly cloudy skies. Monday is going to have a high of 22 with partly cloudy skies. And Tuesday will have a high of 26 with partly cloudy skies. Looking at today's almanac, the average high for this time of year is 16 degrees, with the average low being 2. The record high on this day was set back in 1926 with 29, and the record low was set back on 1909 with minus 16. The sun rose at 6:10 a.m. today and set at 8:47 p.m. The national forecast has Vancouver and Victoria with nice sunny skies at highs of 19. Edmonton is going to have sunny skies with a high of 20, and Calgary will have a high of 19 with sunny skies. The rest of the prairies have Saskatoon with a high of 15 with sunny skies. Regina is going to have a high of 16 with a chance of showers, and Winnipeg will also have a high of 16 but with partly cloudy skies. Central Canada is going to have Toronto with a chance of thunderstorms and a high of 12. Ottawa and Montreal will have highs of 14 with partly cloudy skies. The East Coast has Fredericton with a high of 14 and sunny skies, Halifax a high of 13 with sunny skies, and Charlottetown a high of 8 with sunny skies. Finishing off the national forecast with St. John's, we have a high of 5 with a chance of showers.
Statistics Canada says the economy shrunk 0.2% in February, but economists say bad weather was likely the larger culprit than uncertainty related to the trade war with the United States. CIBC economist Andrew Grantham says poor winter conditions hurt sectors such as mining, oil and gas, transportation, and real estate. Meanwhile, early estimates indicate real GDP increased 0.1% last month. Deloitte says the uncertainty from trade policies and companies' efforts to get orders in before U.S. tariffs hit mean a sharp drop in investment and rising unemployment. The firm sees unemployment peaking at 7.5% in the third quarter before starting to trend back under 7% next year. Along with the uncertainty over U.S. tariff policies is how Canada's re-elected Mark Carney-led Liberal government will respond. Although Deloitte says supports are expected to focus on infrastructure spending to prepare for shifting trade patterns. A Toronto investment management firm has made a play for Hudson's Bay. Urbana says it made an offer for the historical company's intellectual property because its aim is to make money and stand up for Canada. The bid does not include an offer for the 80 liquidating Bay stores or the 16 licensed under the Saks banners because the firm doesn't have retail expertise. But Urbana has its eye on the 1670 charter that established Hudson's Bay and will bid on it during a separate auction. Visa wants to give artificial intelligence your credit card so it can do your shopping for you. The idea would see you set a budget and some preferences, and AI agents could find and buy you a sweater, weekly groceries, or an airplane ticket. Visa is partnering with a group of leading AI chatbot developers to connect their AI systems to Visa's payments network. Pilot projects begin today, with more widespread usage expected next year. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was down 32 points on the day to finish at 24,841. The Dow was up 141 to 40,669. The S&P 500 was up 8 points to 5,569, and the Nasdaq was down 14 to 17,446. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 220 to 58.22 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 3 cents to 3.35 US. Gold was down 28.99 to 32.8788 US an ounce. Silver was down 32 cents to 32.60 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.90 per bushel. Barley is at $6.99. Canola is at $15.46. And corn is at $8.20 per bushel. Live cattle were down 60 cents to $215.75. Feeder cattle May contract was down $1.45 to $292.57, and lean hogs May contract was down 62 cents to $91.92. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours and currently sits at $72.50 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, U.S. President Donald Trump says he'll be meeting with Mark Carney at the White House within the next week after receiving a call from the Prime Minister. After months of taunting, saying Canada could be the 51st state, Trump says he expects to have a, quote, great relationship with Canada. Well, after a federal election, there's always going to be some interesting responses from Alberta. That and more is coming right up as I chat with our Alberta correspondent, Tyler Dawson. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website or YouTube channel anytime to check out more of our stories and interviews. The Liberal victory in Ottawa has certainly brought a bit of a gloomy cloud over Alberta. And joining us to chat about this is Tyler Dawson, our legislative reporter and the National Post's Alberta correspondent. Good to have you with us, Tyler.
Thanks for having me back.
So you've seen a lot of smiles in Alberta this morning? Maybe not so much, right?
Well, in my riding, actually, at Edmonton Centre, there's probably some pretty happy people here. Sent another Liberal to Ottawa, but down your way, I expect not so much.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of disappointment here for sure. A bit of anger as well. So we'll see, if that simmers down or not. Premier Danielle Smith calling for a reset in relations with the federal government. So what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, it's a bit hard to say. I mean, we had a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, when Danielle Smith met with Mark Carney for the first time, and sort of in those, that strange sort of intervening week or two there when he was prime minister, and she put out sort of a list of 9 demands, 9 policies basically that she wanted to see Ottawa change. A lot of them were sort of energy related, but there was also, the single-use plastics ban, some stuff like that. So I think that's probably what she means when she talks about a reset, is hoping that there's going to be some movement from the federal government on some of these issues that are of particular concern to the Alberta government and probably to Alberta voters as well. I mean, I think it's relatively fair to say that Alberta voters, broadly speaking, sort of rejected the Liberals. I mean, I think you maybe had 27-28% of the popular vote went to the Liberals in Alberta here, and pretty much the bulk of the rest of it went to the Conservatives. You know, a few points here and there for the NDP, because I think they walked away with one seat in Edmonton Strathcona.
Yeah. Rachel
so
Notley's
so
overriding. So yeah.
yeah. So you know, a pretty resounding rejection, I think it's fair to say, of the Carney Liberals from most quarters in Alberta. So, you know, what is that going to look like? I mean, it's hard to say, especially because, you know, we don't know yet how this minority parliament's going to work out in Ottawa. You know, it's the Liberals are quite close to a majority, I think 3 or 4 seats away, but the Conservatives are trailing them by not that much, and then you've a very diminished group of New Democrats and a modest group of Bloc Québécois MPs. So how does this shake out? Who holds the balance of power? If it's the Bloc Québécois, that puts Alberta perhaps in not a great spot for getting some of the things done that it wants. So in terms of that reset, in terms of the relationship, I think it's going to be Mark Carney's ability to reset that relationship or change the tone, I think is perhaps going to be reduced depending on which party he's depending on to keep his government propped up.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, Mark Carney saying, of course, unity is a big thing here right now. He wants to put that as priority. Okay, how do you do that exactly? I would suggest he probably should visit Premier Danielle Smith soon. He's talking about, setting up a meeting. He made a call, of course, to Trump. So maybe he needs to, pop by and have a coffee, go to an Oilers game together. I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll certainly see some of that. I think, and this is not a criticism of Premier Smith. I mean, is there anything that a federal government could do that is going to appease Alberta to some extent? I think that's a little bit the tricky situation that Carney finds himself in, especially considering that he has pretty close to a majority government with support sort of across the country. I mean, how do you balance some of those regional priorities, right? I mean, if you have Liberal MPs from Quebec who, don't want to see a pipeline running from Alberta through to Quebec, and Alberta does. I mean, how do you balance those regional priorities and some of those regional tensions? I mean, I think that part of the gambit that the Alberta government has made here is saying that we want all of these things or crisis will ensue. That's putting a pretty high bar. That's putting a pretty big offer, pretty big sort of opening negotiation on the table. And so what does the federal government respond with? How does the Alberta government respond to that, right? So I think that certainly there are some meetings that can happen, some discussions that can happen that might sort of bring down the temperature a little bit. But at the end of the day, I think it's a really challenging position for the federal government to address some of those concerns when, of course, they're the government of, the whole country, not just Alberta. So I think it's sticky. And I think the outcome of this, probably no matter what, is we're going to see some sort of resurgence in sort of Western alienation. Perhaps that'll morph into some sort of separatist sentiment, that sort of thing. Whether that goes anywhere, of course, is another question.
Yeah, and that has heated up here. Somebody actually just told me this morning that there was a large increase, they're just seeing this in social media, in numbers signing up for an Alberta separation petition that's going around. And I know, somebody contacted me a while back saying, hey, would you sign this, So what are you hearing? Are Albertans serious about separation?
Well, there's always been a small but noisy cohort of Albertans who are sort of pretty fervent separatists, and they've never really had any true success. There was a single separatist MLA elected in, I think, 1982 in a by-election, and then he promptly lost in the general election like 6 weeks later. They've never held electoral power. They've never managed to come forward with anything, even approaching a referendum. What you do have is a much larger cohort of people who are angry, sort of broadly speaking. I mean, if you look at the polling data, you've got, they're big numbers of people who feel disrespected by Ottawa and by the rest of the country, somewhere in sort of the 30 to 60% range. And it's heavily partisan. The partisan affiliations really matter here. New Democrat voters are a lot less likely to be angry about Alberta's place within Canada compared to UCP voters. But what does seem to be, there's two things happening right now. I mean, the first is that you do have a little bit more coordination perhaps than you have in the past. You have a couple people who are sort of slowly becoming involved in this, who are relatively skilled organizers. They're not just, sort of angry folks with a bunch of trucks driving around. That could make something of a difference. And of course, you have the potential for a citizen-led referendum on this because of changes. Well, it's an older piece of legislation, but there's going to be updates to this piece of legislation that makes it a little bit more easier for citizens to bring forward a referendum on any given question, which of course could include a separation referendum.
Yeah, tell us a bit about that, right? I think this is called the Citizens Initiative Act. I know the Premier is talking about it today. Basically, the numbers get reduced quite a bit as to how many people you need to line up, right?
That's right. So this is part of for referendum purposes, but also recall elections actually, and so both thresholds have been reduced. But in the case of the referendum, what the old rules, or what the current rules are until the new legislation passes, is that you need 20% of all eligible voters representing 2/3 of ridings in Alberta. And they need to be in-person signatures, and they need to be collected over, I believe it's 60 or 90 days. Right. So relatively tight time period, relatively tricky to get.
Pretty hard to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, that would, sort of objectively be, it's got to be a couple 100,000 signatures that you'd have to get. So that would be a real challenge. Now, the changes that are being proposed, I believe, are bringing it down to 10% of all people who voted in the previous election. And the time period has been extended as well by, I believe, 30 or 60 days. So the threshold's basically reduced. I mean, that's still a big ask. If you've got, 200,000, say, eligible voters in Alberta, well, it'd be more than that. It'd be 2 million probably about. So you still need a couple 100,000 signatures to make that happen. So still a big ask, still a challenge to do, but certainly an order of magnitude less than it was.
And do those have to be in-person signatures, or can they be online?
I think they do. I'm quite sure they do need to be in-person signatures. And I think there's a little bit of logic to that in the sense that, then you've got sort of identifiable people as opposed to, if you have a change.org petition, how do you know that someone's in Albertan versus in Saskatchewan or Ontario?
Well, I'll be talking with somebody from the Alberta Prosperity Project later this week. So I believe Jeff Rath. So I'll ask him on some of those things. How doable they think it is. So we'll see where it goes. I think the last survey ever I saw on that was as high as 38% of Albertans saying they would be willing to secede and so forth. But again, easier said than done. But I can see right now, if they catch the wave, of anger that's there right now, maybe something could happen. So we'll see. Now, these amendments that you're talking about also, you're saying change a few things about Alberta elections, including a ban on electronic vote tabulators. So things have to be counted by hand. I don't have a huge problem with that, but your thoughts there?
Well, so this was I believe it was an election promise that the UCP made back in 2023, and it came up. It's come up at least the last UCP convention, maybe the one before it as well. Just there's some concern, essentially, at the grassroots that electronic voting could be compromised in some fashion. So whatever it is, what it is, the votes are going to get counted. It'll be slower. As all of us journalists came off a very late night on Monday, perhaps we are less enthusiastic about hand counting than everybody else. I mean, that fundamentally would be the biggest change here, is that it would just be a much longer, slower election night counting these things. The other change, which is potentially more significant for the sort of population as a whole, is going to be changes to the corporate and union donations, which at present are banned in Alberta politics. They're also banned in federal elections as well. So if these changes come into effect, you'll basically have reasonably big money back in Alberta politics. You'll have corporations and unions able to donate to individual candidates, to constituency associations, to parties, things like that. So I mean, at the end of the day, that tends to be a matter of perspective, where how one sort of gauges spending versus free speech, but certainly could change the composition. And even you think about the advertising spend that becomes possible with the things.
It does impact it'll be very interesting to see. There's pros and cons to that for sure. The Alberta government also announcing the Alberta is calling bonus. Now that's a $5,000 credit, I believe, for skilled workers who come here, and that apparently is starting up pretty soon as well. Can you explain just briefly how that works and what they're hoping to accomplish with that?
Yeah, so they'd announced the program. It must have been last year, and what is open now is applications to sort of receive that credit. So the idea was basically that there's a shortage, perhaps there is perhaps a shortage of skilled tradespeople in Alberta. There's certainly not a shortage, I think, compared to some other provinces in the country. But at any rate, given the sort of composition of our economy, there's been this desire to bring in skilled labor, skilled tradespeople, things like that. And so the idea was, if those people would relocate to Alberta, they would get a tax credit on their Alberta taxes when they paid them for their first year. And there were some conditions. They had to be here for a year beforehand, I think, or be here for a year before they could claim it, things like that. So applications are basically open. So we'll start seeing some of the data on that after tax season, I believe, just to find out how many people actually took the province up on that offer. So it's kind of interesting, though, in the context of, there's this whole Alberta is calling campaign to begin with, and then this was just sort of another facet of it. But of course, if people recall last summer, there ended up being a bit of a controversy about that when people sort of looked at the number of people coming to Alberta, the impact that was having on some public services and housing and stuff like that. So the government finds itself in a bit of a catch-22 here, right? I mean, more people coming, more skilled workers coming is generally good for the economy. Perhaps not necessarily always in the short term, but certainly in the medium long term, population growth is a positive. But it causes these downsides of more pressure on real estate, more pressure on schools, things like that. So it's actually a bit of a sticky political situation for the provincial government.
It is. No two ways about it. Yeah. Well, we should maybe just jump back for a moment here to Prime Minister Carney. Now, he's on record saying he wants to make Canada an energy superpower. Sounds good, right? But what are you hearing from Alberta's energy sector on that, considering, again, his long-term track record on climate change and being vehemently really against fossil fuel development? So how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, they're sort of cautiously optimistic. I mean, I suppose if you're in any sort of business sector, you don't want to come out the day or two after the election and say, this is like a disaster of colossal proportions. That would you're not going to get very much from a government going with that route, I think. But they're cautiously optimistic. They're saying that, look, he said some of the right things on the campaign trail in terms of energy corridors and in terms of growing conventional energy. In addition to clean energy, he actually mentioned conventional energy in his election night speech. And it was this really funny moment. He said, we're gonna make Canada into a clean and conventional energy sort of superpower. And there's a bit of a pause in the audience, and then they started applauding as if they heard conventional energy and thought, "Ooh, don't know if we should be cheering for that." But the energy sector is basically saying, "Look, we felt like we heard some of the right things, but now we're waiting to see what policy changes actually are in effect, whether this is all talk or if there's going to be any action to support the sector or give the sector more of an opportunity to grow."
And that's what it comes down to. It's words versus actions, right? And, so he's got an opportunity to prove himself here. Will he or won't he? I guess again, if you're a business investor in the oil and gas sector, you're coming into Alberta. The only way you're going to risk your money is if you feel confident that there's an environment there that you're going to get some bang for your buck, some return on your investment. And if it's not, then why would you invest your money in there if you're not sure where things are at or where they're going to be going? And again, we're talking about Bill C-69, right? The No More Pipelines Act, essentially, or the Impact Assessment Act, technically. But, right, will those timelines for approval on new projects actually be reduced? Carney's been saying, well, okay, it's been taking, an average of 5 years, 6 years, whatever. Now we're going to make sure it only takes 2 years. Well, I guess time will tell if that happens. And I think we're the only major oil exporting nation with that kind of policy. So it puts us at a competitive disadvantage to all these other nations around the world, right? So, I'm assuming they're going to be looking for some concrete policy changes. And if it doesn't happen, then I guess it's more of the status quo, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that does seem to be. I think that's exactly right.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Real briefly, by the way, I'm up against the clock here, but Christina Gray, Alberta NDP MLA, she was going to introduce that legislation on tips, like at the restaurant sort of thing, hospitality places, staying with the workers, not going to business owners or management. But the UCP voted that down. So what's the logic behind that?
Who knows? I mean, the strange thing about this is it seemed to have support from the Alberta Hospitality Association, sort of the industry group. Business owners seemed more or less fine with it. It certainly would have increased earnings for, quote unquote, the little guy. I just don't really know. If I was the NDP, I'd be sulking this away for the next election to bring it
For
up
sure.
at every
Yeah,
possible
I just scratched my
opportunity.
head on that one. I'm going, okay, maybe there's more to
Yeah.
this that I'm not hearing or seeing, but
No.
I thought that should be a win-win. But anyway, well,
Bit of
thanks
a
so much
mystery.
for your time again, Tyler.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Canadians from one end of our country to the other continue to be frustrated with the lack of affordable housing. Will it ever change? And if so, what would it take to accomplish this? Today's guest has researched this area carefully and will shed some light on the issue for us. Stephen Globerman is a senior fellow and the editing chair in measurement with the Fraser Institute, an independent, nonpartisan Canadian public policy think tank. He is also one of the co-authors of a new study, The Crisis in Housing Affordability, Population Growth and Housing Starts from 1972 to 2024. Stephen, great to have you with us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Now, you write that the annual number of new homes being built in Canada in recent years is virtually the same as it was back in the 1970s, despite annual population growth now being 3 times higher. That is astounding, is it not?
Yes, it was, I would say, unsurprising in direction, but surprising in magnitude.
And to what degree has Canada seen the population increase over the last few years, and what has been the driver of the increase?
The driver of the increase is almost entirely immigration, and particularly it's immigration of temporary workers and international students. That has been a phenomenon that has really picked up speed since 2015, but post-COVID, so we're talking about post-2020, is when the increase really accelerated.
Now, many Canadians are probably having trouble wrapping their head around the why. Why on earth have we not been building enough new housing units to keep up with the demand? Like, what's stopping us?
Well, there are a number of issues, and first and foremost, with a scarce amount of land, and land is one of the limiting inputs. You need to increase density if you're going to increase housing units proportionate to the growth in the population. There are lots of restrictions on density, multifamily housing, particularly in residential areas, particularly in major cities like Vancouver and Toronto. So that's one constraint. A second constraint are the fees that are attached to development, and the fees are quite high. In some cases, they can be 20 or 30% of the building costs, and we're talking about putting in infrastructure and amenities, libraries, parks, daycares, centers. So that's a contributor. Recently, shortages of construction workers is a contributor. So it's multifactorial, but clearly, the regulatory environment surrounding construction is a major issue restricting building.
And are we seeing similar housing problems at about the same rate across Canada?
Over the period of the study, the answer is yes. There are obviously differences across provinces within particular subperiods. For example, British Columbia had a pretty significant spurt in population growth from the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s that was really out of sync with other parts of Canada. More recently, Alberta has had, and I'm talking about the last few years, Alberta has had a significant increase in population, which has caused that gap between starts and population growth to widen for Alberta. So in the broad sweep of the study, yes, it's a similar story across provinces with exceptions for particular subperiods.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Alberta, because there's a recent reports that Alberta was leading the way nationally with the most new housing starts in Canada. Is there something that we can learn from the way Alberta is doing things?
Well, it is true that Alberta has had a relatively good performance with respect to starts in the last few years, although, as you know, Alberta has also had a real spurt in population growth. And so that gap, with the exception of 2024, where starts increased relative to population, the unaffordability problem in Alberta is starting to materialize because of the population growth. What can we learn? I'm not sure it's a unique Alberta story. I mean, the story is very simple. Either population growth has to slow down, or as a nation, we have to find a way to accelerate the building of housing. And there's no magic wand. It's going to require increased density with the consequences for having increased density.
Well, I've heard of many Canadians moving from other provinces to Alberta, particularly Ontario, to Alberta, just because of the Alberta Advantage, where there's lower taxes, there's no provincial sales tax. Any validity to that?
But yes, it's certainly true that Alberta has attracted a significant amount of interprovincial migration, which is unusual. Other provinces have been losing population, although I would point out that the Maritimes are also now attracting Canadians from other provinces. And yes, the lower taxes are a significant factor.
Well, what's the attraction with the Maritime provinces?
Lower housing prices. I wouldn't say it's affordable housing, but it's relatively affordable compared to Ontario and BC in particular.
Now, we just got out of a federal election, and how much of a difference would it make when we saw all these federal parties making promises to cut the GST from new houses, or things like home savings accounts? Because we heard political parties promising that the government will get back into the home building business, but I mean, there were mixed answers about where the money would come from. Some would say it came from taxpayers' money. Others did not even want to answer that question.
Mhm. Well, I think first we need to distinguish between policies that are going to work on the supply side of the market and policies that work on the demand side. It doesn't help housing affordability if you subsidize demand without accelerating the growth in supply. And many of the policies that the parties are talking about are policies that basically boost demand by subsidizing the purchase of housing. Unless we increase the supply of housing, that's just going to drive housing prices up even more. So, issue number one: how do we increase the supply of housing? And as we were talking about a moment ago, it really amounts to working with the municipalities to reduce and even hopefully eliminate unnecessary restrictions on building. Where's the savings going to come from? That's a very good question, because developers have to borrow money to build the housing. Where's the savings going to come from? I did a study for the Fraser Institute that was published about 2.5 months ago, where I raised that very issue. And the answer is Canadians are going to have to consume less and save more. And that includes the federal government, because the government is a major borrower, and what's required is more savings going into housing and less savings going into other types of expenditures, including government operating expenditures.
Now, some politicians were advocating for rent controls as a solution. What does the research tell us about that approach?
It tells us that it's a very bad policy if what you want is more affordable housing. Um, Rent controls discourage building of housing, of new housing, for the obvious reason that you're constraining the returns that developers can earn. for the risk capital they're putting up. And secondly, you discourage the maintenance, maintaining the existing building stock, so you have faster depreciation of housing. It's not a good policy. So if what we're concerned about, and it's a legitimate concern, is a certain percentage of Canadians needing assistance, financial assistance, to be able to afford housing. In an earlier study I did for the Fraser Institute, I recommended housing vouchers, where you set an income threshold appropriate for the cost of housing in the area the person is living in or the family is living in, and then you provide a voucher which enables that family to compete for housing in that market, and that is an efficient way to subsidize the subset of Canadians who need financial support to get housing.
Now, you alluded to some hoops that developers have to jump through at the municipal level as well, and apparently building permit approval timelines are causing delays. Can you talk more about that?
Yes, the building permit delays mean that developers have money that's being tied up for a period of time without earning a rate of return on it, and they have to pass that along when they actually finally either sell the property they've developed, or if they're renting the property, it goes into the rental prices. The cost of delay has to be recaptured in the price that's charged for the housing.
Now, what about municipalities charging building fees? Why is that necessary, and is it in any way helpful to our housing problems? I mean, they're already going to be charging property taxes once the building is developed.
Yeah, well, some of the fees are related to infrastructure development. If you do have increased density, you're going to need more facilities, sewage and roads and the like. Some of it is related to amenities. I mentioned those before, things like green space and daycare centers. We can argue about what amenities are appropriate or not. The issue that you raise, which is the fundamental issue, is how do you pay for those? You do need infrastructure if you have more people living in a particular community. How do you pay for it? Well, property taxes is the typical way. Now, that still means that house owners are going to pay for the property tax. There's no getting around it. But it does facilitate the actual building process. So if we want more building done, we need to be more selective about what amenities are going to be considered necessary, and then secondly, find an intelligent way to pay for it, which I would argue, and I agree with you, is the property tax.
And you mentioned immigration, and I want to circle back to that because it would seem obvious that we would need to reduce immigration numbers if we want to see any downward movement in housing prices. Any thought as to what degree immigration numbers need to come down?
Well, I think if we're going to have that discussion, it has to be a broader set of considerations. Strictly speaking, if the only thing we were concerned about what was housing affordability, presumably we would reduce population growth to the point where whatever our housing starts were, they would be matched by population. So at the current rate of housing starts, we would need to reduce immigration by 2/3. But obviously, that's not the only consideration in setting immigration policy. There's economic issues, there's refugee and asylum issues. So I certainly would not say that we should calibrate the immigration policy strictly on the basis of housing affordability concerns.
And we're almost out of time. So any final thoughts on what needs to happen to get some more positive results for affordable housing?
Well, I think to get back to some of our earlier discussion, I think there needs to be more realism in the policy setting about what it's going to take to significantly increase the housing stock, which is what's required. And that really means a very fundamental consideration, not just of zoning and infrastructure fees and the like. It really requires a deep amount of thinking about what the government is spending money on, because the savings, as we were talking about a while ago, the savings have to come from somewhere. The government is a big user of capital. It borrows a lot of money. Is it going to say, okay, if we're prioritizing housing, we're going to spend less on other things and free up that money to go into the housing market so people can borrow money at a lower interest rate? I think that's a fundamental issue that hasn't been talked about in the current political campaign.
Stephen Globerman is one of the co-authors of a new study, The Crisis in Housing Affordability. Stephen, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome.
I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.